Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter.
No, thank you.
It's the Go Pack Go show.
Oh, shit. Okay. Yeah, Packers football. Yeah, I mean, I joke every year that I guess that I'm not going to do that anymore. Every time they lose, the end always sucks, even though if this one wasn't as painful as some in years past. But yeah, here I am. I am the host of your show tonight. I am Jacob Westendorf here on Pulse of the Pack. The Packer season is over, and not in a happy way like we were hoping. And we'll talk about that tonight. The Packers lose to the 49ers 37-20 in San Francisco, a house of hell that I feel like they haven't won in since 1998. I could be wrong, but I also have a feeling I may not be. I'm your host this evening, as I mentioned, and I am joined, as always, another year and another day older and another day not as wise, Jason Perrone. Jason, this blows.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way to put that.
It does. I just told Paul before we started recording I'm not quite in off season mode yet. And I had a lot of things that I wanted to do this off season differently than I have in the past few years. One of which is to get more involved in draft talk and analysis. But as happy as I was to be where the Packers were a few days ago, I'm still not ready to start doing that stuff yet.
Yeah, neither am I, and we'll kind of talk about our process on that as this offseason goes along. Joined with me also now, of course, is the great Paul Brettel. Paul, I guess we can officially transition from football season to baby watch now, right?
Yeah, coming up only a couple months away. It'll be actually right around opening day of Brewers baseball season, coincidentally.
There you go. If you are anything like me, then your calendar knowledge is completely 100% based around the fact of the sports calendar and how those days in particular fall. So I will never forget my anniversary, for example, because I know it fell on a football Sunday. And the next day, Jason and I watched the Packers beat, well, the San Francisco 49ers, but not those San Francisco 49ers that the Packers played on Sunday. Unfortunately, that team is big, they're fast, they're nasty, they're physical, and the Packers just couldn't match that for a lot of different reasons. Really, my thought on this team, real quick, is I think the Packers are a very good team. I don't think you can luck into being 13-3, 14-4 if you include the playoffs. I just don't think that's possible, and I know that a lot of people over the next couple days are going to use this as an opportunity to say, see, I told you Green Bay wasn't that good. The reality is, Jason talks about this all the time, this game is about matchups. And where the things the 49ers do best are the things the Packers do the worst. And that is a recipe for disaster, and the 49ers are really good at it. Something else that I think is true is that if you guys think about it, this year is the first year that the 49ers have been in the playoffs since 2013. I mean, it's been quite a few. They've had a long time of being really bad, and that's how you're able to draft guys like Eric Armstead, Solomon Thomas, Nick Bosa, players of that caliber. And the Packers really had a 2-year sabbatical where they weren't bad, when they were bad, so they were able to get some of those guys in. But this is a team that's been being built for quite some time. But I do think this is going to be an opportunity for those people, and that's fine. They can feel free to hold that narrative. I simply think it was a bad matchup for Green Bay, and we'll talk about why it's a bad matchup, and it's still a little embarrassing the way things turned out. But that's kind of my final thought on the game. Jason, real quick, just kind of some general macro view thoughts on how Sunday went and what that means for the whole team.
Should you just say real quick?
Well, I mean, as much as possible.
We may have to do this show in 4 or 5 parts. Then, I said that the Packers were going to have to play a near perfect game just to compete and have a chance to win. So that part manifested itself on Sunday. They played far from that, and the scoreboard reflected that very much. So it was not the performance that we were hoping for from the Packers, especially given how the first matchup went. And I do think pride matters, and I have a lot of pride as a fan, and I know I'm not out there blood, sweat, and tears fighting and winning these games, but it was disappointing. to see the result and some of the efforts. And then you get to the end of the season and you realize that, there's going to be some changes and the team's not going to look the same next year. And that can be both good and not good. And a lot of things hit you all at one time. But there's going to be plenty of questions. The good thing is for us as podcasters is there's going to be a lot for us to talk about this offseason just based off of that one game, because there are a lot of questions still out there about who the Packers really are, the coaching staff, the effort, the adjustments, all that other kind of stuff. Do they have the right guys here and there? And, going beyond, obviously, adding talent and adding players. But it was a tough one to watch. It definitely was. The disappointing thing for me is that since 2010, when they won the NFC Championship game in Chicago, and that game wasn't particularly pretty either, they've been back 3 times, and they competed with Seattle for a long time, but they ended up losing that game. So it's really been 3 pretty bad performances in 3 different ways, and it's disappointing to get that far and then turn in a performance like that. Now the past 2 times they've been there, they didn't even look like they belonged. So it just it leaves you even more empty, wondering how that can happen to a team that got as far as they did.
Yeah, that's the part I think that bothers me the most is now, I mean, granted, these are 3 years apart and 2 completely different teams, but the last time the Packers were there, Green Bay didn't look like they belonged in the game. They got blown out of the Georgia Dome in the last game that was ever there. And, I mean, that team was not running on fumes at that point, quite frankly, and wasn't as talented. This year's team had a chance from a talent standpoint, but I think we would all agree the 49ers are a more talented roster at this point in time. And it's one of those things, we tried to keep perspective all year long that, this year was a building year for the Packers, but then they started 8-1, 10-2, 13-3. Then they're playing in the NFC Championship game against a team that the 49ers are very good, but I don't feel like everybody was completely sold on them throughout the entire season. So I think a lot of people thought that the Packers had an opportunity to win and get to a Super Bowl. And maybe that just wasn't feasible this year, even though they were able to get to an NFC Championship game. And I think both of those things can be true. The part, Jason, that you said at the end, the reason that I was as upset, disappointed, whatever wording you want to use, is because this team was special. And maybe not necessarily always on the field. Maybe they didn't win pretty. Maybe they didn't blow teams off the field, those things like that. But you hear those guys too, man, and it's not coach speak. When Billy Turner and Aaron Jones and Mercedes Lewis and Aaron Rodgers and Zadarius Smith and a bunch of guys after the game on Sunday are talking about there was something special they created in that locker room, and that makes teams easier to root for, quite frankly. I think when you have a team that really cares about each other like that. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily need that to win a Super Bowl. The 2013 Seattle Seahawks had a literal freaking fist fight in the locker room and won a championship that season. Their cornerback, who happened to play against Green Bay on Sunday, would tell the quarterback in practice, "You suck." And the chemistry on that team wasn't necessarily great. But sometimes things like that, things that Green Bay has, make teams easy to root for. Paul, bring you in here. Just kind of general thoughts on how the game went. Obviously, I mean, I think we've touched on quite a bit of it at this point. But what were your general emotions as the clock winded down? Because I think all of us would pretty much agree once the score hit 27-0 at halftime, the game was over.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It was disappointing, embarrassing. And you brought up a great point about just the mismatches. The week before against Seattle, I was very confident in this Packers team that they could win. And if they won by 9 or 10 points, I wouldn't have been surprised given the matchups. This past week against San Francisco, the roles were reversed, and Green Bay was in the position of being in the deficit in a number of areas. So you knew they were going to need to play a near perfect game just to have a chance to come away with the win, and they just shot themselves in the foot on top of San Francisco playing an excellent game. I mean, there were the false starts, the turnovers, there were the fumbles that were recovered, the missed tackles on defense, J.K. Scott with the shank punt. It was just, once again, it was one of those things where if it could go wrong, it did go wrong, which is what happened in both of their California trips, essentially, against San Francisco the first time and L.A. But on a positive note, this team has come a really long ways in just one season. And unfortunately, we saw that there's still a gap there. not a huge one. The step that they took from 2018 to 19 is a lot bigger than the one that they have to take from 2019 to 2020, in my opinion, to push themselves into that Super Bowl conversation. Overall, it's a positive year, but like I said, there's no sugarcoating that. It was embarrassing, disappointing, and they never even gave themselves a chance to make a game out of it.
No, they had a good start. I was fired the hell up after they had that stop on 3rd and 1. I was like, this is a statement right there. We are not getting our ass kicked today. You are not going to ram the ball, because that was run, and Green Bay stuffed them on 3rd and 1. Zadarius Smith and Kenny Clark making plays in the backfield, and I thought it was a really good start. And then Green Bay's offense did what they've done in every game that not every game, but in their trips to California. They started slow. And kind of like you said, Paul, they never had answers for the 49ers being able to move the ball kind of at will. And something I can tell you guys as we get through this offseason is narrative-based analysis ain't a thing. Not on my show. If they're going to do that, then that's on their own, but I will not allow that crap. I think that some of the stuff that I've read today is ridiculous and really a byproduct of confirmation bias. Michael Lombardi put out an embarrassing podcast, I thought. He called Matt LaFleur Matt LaFuck, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, I'll say those things on this show because whatever, but those guys get paid a lot of money to be on that podcast. And for you to call somebody that in the business, I personally think is asinine. And do I think that Matt LaFleur coached his best game on Sunday? No. But I also I think that Lombardi took this because he was very critical of the LaFleur hire and took this as an opportunity to say, this guy sucks, and Sunday proved why. And then in the same process proceeds to say Mike Shanahan should have been Green Bay's head coach on Sunday. That's who they should have hired when they gave the job to Matt LaFleur last year. So yeah, 67-year-old Mike Shanahan, who got fired by Washington because he was inept and unable to coach anymore. But that's beside the point. The reason I say that is because our next point is going to sound kind of like a narrative, but I don't think it is. And that really does deal with Mike Pettin. And guys, it seems like every year since 2010, we're talking about the Packers defense finding a way to embarrass themselves on a big stage. And I've seen a bunch of different numbers, a few things that have changed. The numbers vary, but it's over 120 yards rushing before contact. That tells me guys aren't in position. That tells me guys, and yes, I do know there's a mismatch between Green Bay's offensive line and Green Bay's defensive line. But it's kind of the feeling I had after the first Colin Kaepernick game, where if you get a record set against you, somebody loses their job. And I wrote something for Dairyland in the middle of the season saying, are we sure that Mike Pettin is the guy? Because Green Bay's invested a lot. Two big-time pass-rushing free agents, a safety, 2 first-round picks. And this defense was not all that much better than it was a year ago. And at minimum, those investments should mean you don't get a record set against you by, I mean, I know Mostert's a good player, but a backup running back on the game's biggest stage. So, Paul, I've got you here still. I mean, how much jeopardy should Mike Pettin's job be in?
I actually wrote about this today for Dairyland as well. I know you did a few months back, but I kind of put my own thoughts into it. I think there's a possibility of it happening. Some of the numbers I have, their rushing yards per game were almost identical to last year. So were passing yards. They actually gave up more plays of 20 or more yards a season and more plays of 40 or more yards. Their biggest improvement areas were their red zone defense. They were more effective at limiting touchdowns, and they came away with 10 more takeaways. So also that contributed to averaging a little over 5 less points per game, or what the opponent did. However, as you said, they made a lot of additions. And then even if we go back to last year's draft, I mean, Jair Alexander, and Josh Jackson. I know Jackson doesn't play much, but those were first and second round picks spent on that. So you would think with what they've put into it up to this point, those improvements should be there. Now, is it more so because of the players or more so because of Pettin? 50-50. Honestly, I think it's a little more just because of the caliber of players. I mean, they had incredible years from Zadarius and Preston. Amos is just rock solid. Darnell, he's first team all rookie. I mean, they had a special group there. And I know one thing that people can say as well, Blake Martinez struggles at linebacker. There's not someone alongside of Kenny Clark. But if you have a defense with Zadarius, Preston, Kenny Clark, Jair, Amos, Darnell Savage, you should not be exposed like they were. And I don't, it just shouldn't happen that way. Also, another factor, this isn't Matt LaFleur's guy. And whether you think so or not, I believe it. That definitely plays a factor in all of this. When the defensive coordinator who struggled to make adjustments, and the adjustments that he did make on Sunday didn't do really anything. That's tough. That can be tougher for LaFleur to take rather than knowing that that's my guy and who I would want. So I definitely think there's a real possibility. I assume if it's going to happen, it's going to be sooner than later, just because going to the NFC Championship, they already have a later start on the offseason. So just to get someone in and at least start building that continuity sooner than later is going to be better.
Yeah, Matt LaFleur has his final season or final news conference of the season at 9:00 on Wednesday morning. So maybe we'll get an answer there. Paul, that last point you made is exactly why last year I said not everybody, I shouldn't say it like that, but a lot of people really were proponents of, okay, when you fire McCarthy, just make sure you get to bring Pettine back. And I was like, I don't care about that necessarily. If they hire the head coach, they should trust him to make that hire himself. And the idea that he was pushed onto this coaching staff, I don't like that at all. And like I said, I don't think there's any reason at this point to be sold on Mike Pettine. I'll give my full thoughts here in a minute. Jason, Paul mentioned a lot of players that are pretty good. Now, some of those guys had some rookie struggles and some up and down years. We know that. But is this a byproduct more so of the players? It's always players over plays. I understand that. But is there something else that Mike Pettine could have done, or that you think maybe this defense is more talented than the output that it received this year?
I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. I think Mike Pettine needed to make adjustments, and he didn't. He wasn't able to. And from the standpoint of a fan who keeps watching the same thing happen over and over and over again, all you picture is Mike Pettine on the sideline just throwing his arms up, because it didn't seem like they could or wanted or tried to do anything different. As far as the players go, this is why I make it sound so dumbed down, which insert joke about me and my knowledge of football players and draft and all that kind of stuff. But I think last year, Jake, you heard me say a ton. Who do you want the Packers to add this season in free agency or in the draft? I want a football player. And football players, they don't let those kinds of things happen. Okay, I know there's a responsibility. I had somebody on Twitter tell me, well, Zadarius and Preston Smith are pass rushers, man. And I'm like, so you're telling me that's your argument. You're telling me that a team willingly in the NFC Championship game with a chance to go to the Super Bowl takes not only two players out of the equation because their job is to rush the passer, and then the Niners only threw 8 times, but the two best players that you have on the field, you're going to take them out of the equation because it's not their responsibility. No. Do you think, I'm going to use a name, Jake, that's going to bug you, but just bear with me for a second. But do you think guys like Ray Lewis and Brian Dawkins and, Leroy Butler and Reggie White, do you think those guys care what their responsibility is when they're getting their asses kicked? And they're like, look,
there's a lot of things that Ray Lewis doesn't care about, but go on.
Well, we have to do something. We need to do something differently. We need to be more effective. We need to, we've got to make the play. We got to get in the backfield. F this. This guy's killing us. We need to take him down, get him on the ground. Like, at some point, pride should kick in, and you do something there, because I know there's a speed deficiency, and I know that, San Francisco on the first drive ran that trap on 3rd and 8.
First touchdown.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah.
But that's embarrassing. That's embarrassing if you're on the other side of it. That's a hats off and kudos to the 49ers for having the balls to run it, for seeing it on film and knowing it was going to be there. At that point, they didn't have the game in hand yet. And the Packers just obliged. And that was the disappointing part for me. So, if you're going to hold somebody accountable, obviously it does roll up to the top. I said some things about in my Game Balls comment. I gave a lame call to Matt LaFleur because, everybody kind of roasted me for that. And they said, look, Matt LaFleur didn't call the defense. Well, he's the head coach. And Pettine was forced on him. But I think this is one of those moments where I hope Matt LaFleur doesn't overreact like Mike McCarthy did and decide he's going to start calling the defense or handing the play calling off like he did after the Seattle debacle. but maybe getting more involved in understanding what the defensive game plan is and what are they looking to do, because these guys at the end of the day are football coaches, whether they coach on one side of the ball or the other. That's what was disappointing to me, was that nobody could get up and make a play, and nobody said screw it and I don't care anymore. And I'm not saying freelance and that you shouldn't care what the scheme is, but there just wasn't anything. There was no adjustments by the coaching staff, and if there were, I didn't see the players doing what they needed to do. So on both sides, you had a failure, and it led to a ghastly number of rushing yards. I mean, the Packers might just, if they have to go back to San Francisco and play in a playoff game, I don't know that some Packers fans wouldn't maybe forgive them for considering maybe just not getting on the plane. I don't know. It's been ugly twice now in record-setting fashion.
Yeah, I think something that is the part that's the most disturbing to me is I often make a joke of, well, I could do that. Well, I literally mean I think I could have played quarterback on Sunday for the 49ers, and the 49ers still would have won. My thought process is, yes, there are some player deficiencies. I've kind of harped on it all year long. People have said that wide receiver is Green Bay's biggest deficiency, and I don't agree. I've said it even at the trade deadline. I said defensive linemen, because I really think Green Bay doesn't match up in the trenches with teams like this. And that is a big reason why they've been losing some of these big playoff games. You think about it. Seattle was a debacle. We don't need to rehash that. But both 49ers games in the recent 2010s, outdone in the trenches. The Arizona game, outdone in the trenches. The Giants game, outdone in the trenches. It's not sexy, but that is where games are won and lost. If you guys look at the Tennessee Titans are able to win 2 playoff games because they absolutely manhandle the line of scrimmage. The one time they don't do that and Kansas City equals the line of scrimmage with them and they have the best quarterback in the world, they're going to the Super Bowl. Green Bay, that's their biggest thing. And I won't be upset one bit, and we'll talk about this as we get into our draft shows and all that stuff. Offensive line, defensive line. If those are their first 2 picks in the draft, people are going to throw a shit fit, first of all. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. I don't care. The San Francisco 49ers have one good wide receiver or one really good wide receiver, Deebo Samuel, and they're in the Super Bowl. Now, yes, I do think Green Bay needs more players at that position, but I also think that we are ignoring. It's almost like, somebody said to me today, I think our line is fine. Which, yeah, if they bring Bulaga back, their line's pretty good, and they're in a good place. But, fine? I got a hard time with that. This team's got to be, and this isn't that old school mentality of they got to be able to pound the rock and run it 40 times a game down their throat. You have to be really good up front. My friend Owen Reese Draft, says it all the time. Name me a team that's good that isn't good up front. Offensive line and defensive line. And when the Packers won the Super Bowl, their offensive line played really, really good. Clifton, College actually played well. I know, shocker. Josh Sitton, Scott Wells, and baby Brian Bulaga. And then on defense, they had B.J. Raji, Cullen Jenkins, and Clay Matthews. They were awesome up front. Green Bay's not awesome up front anymore. They're like good enough on both sides. So that's something I think that needs to be addressed. And I think the 49ers just kind of really made notice of that. And yes, they need more speed. They need more functional speed because they've got some fast guys on their team, Oren Burks, MVS, etc. But they're not very good. But at the end of that diatribe essentially gets me to this point of, yes, I understand there's some player deficiencies. However, when a team throws 8 passes in a game in 2020 and wins a playoff game, they have no intention of throwing the ball. Yeah, Mike Pettine's got to go. I don't think there should be any question. And you add in the fact that he's not LaFleur's guy. I don't think there's any question at this point. And if they bring him back, I'll hope for the best. But, I mean, what improvements have the Packers made on defense these last 2 years from what they had with Dom Capers, other than the fact it's a bald guy that looks like Stone Cold Steve Austin is calling the plays? That's really the only difference that I can see at this point.
Well, and if you're going to bring Pettine back, then I'll tell you this right now, whether it's right or wrong, I am absolutely over the moon because that means that the Packers are about to go and splash another 3 or 4 starters on defense. Because if they don't, and they trot this same thing out there next year, I can already tell you what my preseason prediction show is going to look like.
Yeah, fair enough. Guys, the other thing I wanted to get to, because listen, there ain't a whole hell of a lot to break down about this game. Let's be 100% frank on that. But anytime the Packers lose in a playoff game, the first rush is to absolve Aaron Rodgers of any and all bit of criticism. It's kind of similar to the way LeBron James fans do it for LeBron, Patriots fans do it for Tom Brady. It's kind of a natural reaction of the fan base to take your team's best player and explain why it wasn't his fault. My thought on the situation is that Aaron Rodgers helped contribute to the 27-0 deficit that his team eventually faced. I did the math myself. He was 7 for 12 for 52 yards with 1 interception in the first half. He lost a fumble as well. Whether you want to give that to him and Lindsley, just Lindsley, the ball hit him in the hands. That's a fumble. It's a turnover. Rodgers turned the ball over twice in the first half and could have been a third, if not for Billy Turner. As that happens, the 49ers build a 27-0 lead. My thought is that if Aaron Rodgers' name was Kirk Cousins and he finished with the stat line that he did, because it looks really good, over 300 yards passing, 2 touchdown passes, high-level completion percentage, all that stuff. But if his name was Kirk Cousins, we would be calling that garbage time stats. Now, Aaron Rodgers is not the reason the Packers lost that game. So don't get it twisted. But he definitely deserves some criticism for the fact that he came out. The first series of the game, the pass to Jamal Williams, if he waits one more second, he has Jimmy Graham. And he had the time to wait. And Troy Aikman noted that on the broadcast. Jimmy Graham's got an easy first down. It's a misread. Rodgers gets a completion out of it. And it looks good on the completion percentage, but it wasn't the right play. And the Packers had to punt because of it. Then you add in all the other stuff? No, Aaron Rodgers is not the reason the Packers lost that game. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is still a very good quarterback. The Packers should absolutely want him to be their starting quarterback for at least the short, well, there's really only short term with somebody who's 36, but for the short-term future, the next 2 seasons. Yes, that is true. He still played like crap on Sunday. For the game that was important, part of the game that was important. And don't give me the 28-3 Patriots comeback. Last I looked, the Falcons in that game didn't have the number 1 defense in the NFL like the 49ers do. The Patriots are an anomaly, so we can't use them. Aaron Rodgers was piss poor on Sunday in the point of the game that mattered. And yes, the defense sucked and that was embarrassing. Both of those things can be true. Jason, what are your thoughts on the play of the quarterback and overall the fans' rush to just completely dismiss any criticism brought to him?
Well, it's been that way in Green Bay for 30 years. They did it with the quarterback before that. They do it with Rodgers. Rodgers absolutely deserves some blame. He threw 2 interceptions. He had 2 fumbles at least. Could have had a third, depending on how you want to rule the center exchange. So that's 5 turnovers that he was involved in. He's getting roasted right now for not diving after that loose ball. I got to be really honest with you. I know I kind of take the lean toward the negative when I'm watching games. And at that point, I already felt like, okay, this game is like, it was only 17-0 at that point. But that seemed like stupid. It seemed like a mountain. It seemed like an absolute mountain. But I thought to myself, he made a decision. Aaron Rodgers made a decision. Either that or he didn't know where the ball was. And I when you're out there, and it sounds ridiculous to say, but when you're out there, those guys are really big. There's a crowd of guys. You don't have the ball. You know that it's in there somewhere. There's a bunch of big guys already rolling around on it. He didn't go after the ball. I personally don't really care because it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. But Aaron Rodgers, that's the other problem though, Jake, is that, like I said, we get to a conference championship game finally, and again, I'm very appreciative of it. We're very fortunate to have the opportunity to be 60 football minutes away from playing a Super Bowl, because that's what we all want when the season starts. And I think we all would have, to know that we were going to have that opportunity would have probably made the ride even that much more fun. And that's part of the ups and downs of football season, is you never know what's going to happen. In 2010, I don't think we knew that this team was Super Bowl worthy until they got into the playoffs. But to get there and have Aaron Rodgers just not perform well and have the defense, just seems like they can never put the perfect game together at the perfect time. Now, they did it in the Super Bowl in 2010, which was great. That's phenomenal. But how do you get to the Super Bowl? By getting to the Super Bowl. You have to get there. And that's been the
Thank
issue
you,
is that
John Madden. My God, that was that was impressive. Go on.
and Booger, and Booger McFarland, I mean, throw the two in there,
Right? Yeah. Do you have a broken pinky?
boom. But you got to get there first, and Aaron Rodgers just hasn't. He has not played his best games in the biggest moments. Now, to overcome what the defense was giving up was going to be a mountain, and it was going to take a lot. But like I said, and like we said coming into it, he was going to have to play above his averages. The team was going to have to play above average to have a chance to win. They didn't do it. They couldn't do it. There's going to be a lot of conversation about what happens from this point forward. It's not going to be on this show. But what happens from this point forward and what's the plan? And there's been a lot of talk about the Packers absolutely having to draft a quarterback and all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that come from games like this, whether it's fair or not, whether we agree with it or not, or we want to punch a hole through our computer. But the fact is, once again, NFC Championship game, Aaron Rodgers did not play well enough. When he did play well enough, I think it was the 49ers. Obviously, it changed up their approach to playing defense, and Rodgers took advantage of it. Made a couple nice throws, big, nice long throw to Adams, and they finally got on the scoreboard. It was nice to see Jay Sternberger catch a touchdown pass, but outside of that, it was just kind of another average day from 12.
Yeah, and we said it. I said it at halftime of the game. Aaron Rodgers has never played well in an NFC Championship game, and that is still true. And that is something that eventually, one time Green Bay was good enough to overcome that. There was another time they should have been good enough to overcome that. They didn't. And Sunday, listen, it could have been Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, name your quarterback, wouldn't have mattered. When you get gashed for 280 something yards on the ground, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. That being said, Green Bay's paying that guy $134 million. And when you do that, and he's a two-time MVP, and Aaron Rodgers knows all this. This isn't lost on him. And the body language stuff, the leadership crap, the whole thing of, he looks like he doesn't care. It's bullshit. Because trust me, these guys put in so much work, so much effort. They kill themselves. They wouldn't do it if they didn't care. Just because he's not screaming and cursing and the TV camera doesn't show him throwing stuff on the sidelines doesn't mean that he doesn't care. So that stuff is ridiculous. That's what I mean by narrative-based analysis. That being said, when Green Bay gave him that contract, and he's a two-time MVP, they need him to be their ace. It's no different. This October, if the Yankees have a big game they need to win, who are they throwing out there? Garrett Cole. That's why they went out and paid for him. And they're not paying for him to pitch 5 innings and 3 earned runs. They're paying for him to pitch 7 innings of shutout baseball. And I say that to say Aaron Rodgers, he doesn't need to throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. But he needs to not turn the ball over twice on careless mistakes in the first half. He needs to hit some simple reads to pick up first downs, make some plays and score some points and keep them in the game. The Packers are a play here or there in the first half away from only being down 17-14 instead of 27-0. Instead it was 27-0 and the game was over at halftime and it was all over but the crying. Paul, what do you make of this? I mean, obviously, I think we're all in agreement that he didn't play that well, but do you have some defense of Aaron Rodgers to throw out here? Or are you just basically on the side that we're at of, no, he didn't play well and it didn't really matter that he would have?
Yeah, no, he didn't play well at all. You guys have already hit on. You look if you're scoreboard watching and looking at his stats, you see 31 for 39 for 326, 2 touchdowns. And yeah, there were 2 interceptions. Yeah, that's a nice day and efficient. But the reason it was so efficient is because in the first half and even into the second half, a lot of the passes that he could complete were just little dump offs, stuff across the middle, 5-10 yards. There wasn't really anything downfield with that Niners defense. And then once the game really got out of hand, that the Niners most likely just started letting up and just were really trying to prevent the big play from happening. But I also don't think I don't know that he could have played good enough in this game for them to win. But it is discouraging that once again in the NFC Championship, and it was a tough matchup for him and the whole team, that we saw another below average performance from him. And just to go back before when he said with so many Packer fans defending him, my theory, I think that comes from the national media being so, certain people being overly difficult or tough on him. So I think a lot of Packer fans are quick to take the other side of that and just defend him. But this was Jacob, you mentioned Kirk Cousins. It was a Matt Stafford type of game. where a lot of stat padding happened in the second half when the game was out of reach, and the Niners were just basically playing not to give up the big play at all.
So there you have it. Yeah, I think I tend to agree. It was a lot of garbage time there. So we could get into needs assessments, we can get into draft, we can get into free agency, we can get into all that stuff, but that is another topic for another day. The topic right now is that the season is over, and that sucks. It's been a lot of fun going through the year. Like I said, this team won 14 games, and that really is a special season. So I think that's something that I don't want to get lost in the fact that the season ended as poorly as it did. And yes, that sucks. I know losing in the NFC Championship game sucks. I think it was David Bakhtiari said he was tired of getting to this point and losing. I think that's a sentiment that all of us have. But I think also this team, when time passes here, it'll smile on this team because it was a fun team. It was a good team to watch, and especially after they won more games this season than they did the last 2 seasons combined. For a rookie head coach, that's important. Now, I know that this time a year ago, Matt Nagy was a darling, and the Chicago Bears were going to start a dynasty, and the league chewed him up and spit him out this year. But that's another topic for another day. Matt LaFleur, they know they need to make some improvements. They know the roster needs to improve. They appear to be in lockstep. That's all a very good thing. Real quick, guys, let's talk. There is a Super Bowl to be played. Just some general thoughts very quick. Jason, we can do a preview a little more in depth, but let's be real general here since we don't want to do a 5-part show. Like you said, who do you like early and why?
So with 2 teams that I don't know much about, I'm always going to tend to go with the team that's got the quarterback. They both have an okay quarterback. They both have a good quarterback, but Patrick Mahomes is head and shoulders above Jimmy Garoppolo in any situation. So I'm going with the Chiefs, because that's what my heart wants at this point, because it's pissed. And if I'm betting money, I'm going with Mahomes and the Chiefs anyway, and would love to see Andy Reid get himself a Super Bowl trophy with his former ties to the Packers. It sucked. We couldn't get the rematch of Super Bowl I, but at least half of the teams from that game got there. So finish the deal, close it out.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting storyline there. The matchup of the big game chokers, if you will, between Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan. Not a fair narrative necessarily, but that is going to be a storyline. Kyle Shanahan, obviously 28-3 offensive coordinator of that Falcons team. Andy Reid, 1 Super Bowl, a bunch of NFC Championship games. I too like the Chiefs. I think that they have Patrick Mahomes. They have those weapons that I think can cause some problems for the 49ers. And on defense, I think they can stop. They just stopped Derrick Henry at least well enough. I think they can slow down that San Francisco ground game. Jimmy Garoppolo is not a scrub by any stretch, but I would like to see how he has to do in a big game if he actually has to play the position instead of being a caretaker. Now, I'm not calling him a game manager, but that's all he's had to do these first 2 games. Paul, what are your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm taking Patrick Mahomes over Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously, and I think that the Niners are still going to have success on the ground. That's just what they do, and they're very good at it. But I think that Chiefs defensive front is going to be able to slow them down, and it's going to come down to Patty Mahomes versus Jimmy Garoppolo. And obviously, I'm going to take Pat Mahomes in that situation.
So there you have it. For now, we all like the Chiefs. We will figure out a Super Bowl preview and make those picks official here in a couple weeks. That's going to do it for this edition of Pulse of the Pack. Be sure to check us out at Packer Pulse. You can follow the YouTube channel, Packer Pulse of the Pack, You can follow Paul. He's at Paul_Brettel. You can follow Jason. He's at Jason Perone. And you can follow me. I am at Jacob Westendorf. And I haven't been lit on fire yet for my Aaron Rodgers story, so I'm feeling pretty good right about now. That may not be the case. Good season. We'll recap it, and we'll be here all off season long. We've got a schedule that we're getting up and running here. We're hoping to do a couple different things. The Senior Bowl is this week already. The Combine will be here before you know it, and then it's full-on draft coverage. And hey, before you blink, it'll be 2020 in 2021, and the Green Bay Packers will be playing in Super Bowl 55. So that's the hope, at least. That's what we're looking at. But for now, they will not be playing in Super Bowl 54 because they lost 37-20 against the San Francisco 49ers. Thank you guys for listening all season long, and we hope to see you through this off season.